Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari.
Divine grace, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Goswami Prabhupada ki jai. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. All Premanandi.
Hari
All glories to Samudravati.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to Samudravati.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to Samudravati.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to Shri Guru, Shri Garga, and Shri Prabhupada. Thank you. So we'll read first from Srila Prabhupada's Leelamrita, continuing. And this is volume 6. And still in the chapter titled Chant Hare Krishna and Fight. Prabhupada was not very happy with the way the Kumbh Mela arrangements had been set up. And we already discussed, it was in the previous reading. And we're continuing. The devotees took their chanting, book distributing, down the main road where they came upon the camps of different Shaivites, who sat around their fires wearing only kopin. Many of them, their hair matted, their bodies were puffing heavily on hashish in chillum pipes. And nearby on the other side of the road were the camps of Vaishnavas from the Ramanuja Sampradaya. Though they were also Tyagis, renunciates, and their appearance was similar to the Shaivites, they were more friendly. And they were glad to see the devotees and shouted out, Hare Krishna, Hare Rama. The devotees were amazed by the piety of the millions of pilgrims. On seeing the kirtan party approach, many people offered prostrated obeisances. Others rolled on the ground or picked up dust where the devotees had walked and put it on their mouths. Although many of the pilgrims were poor, they came forward and dropped at least a few paisa into the pot carried by one of the devotees. Anyone who gave a rupee would receive a book, and the books became so popular that people would come out and ask for them by name. Some people threw money, and the sannyasis would catch it in their top clothes, which they would hold out like aprons. By the end of the day, the devotees had distributed about 7,000 pieces of literature. On the second night, Srila Prabhupada again sat up, while Rameshwar Swami tried futilely to keep the heater going. Hari Sari had placed Srila Prabhupada's dictating equipment on the desk, but Prabhupada did not touch it. January 14th, Srila Prabhupada's third day in Allahabad, was the first day of Kumbh Mela bathing, and would be a special opportunity for book distribution. An ISKCON chanting party of about 50 men and several Indian Gurukula boys was very well received as they traveled throughout the Mela. At 1:30 p.m., the time of auspicious bathing, the kirtan party made its way to the Triveni. As they approached, the police cleared a path for them all the way to the water. By evening, they had distributed 8,000 books. And for the first time since they had arrived, Prabhupada expressed his pleasure at their success. He ordered some of the sannyasis to stay at the Mela until all the books were distributed. The next morning, despite ill health, Prabhupada took a walk. Surrounded by about 25 disciples, he walked slowly. Although he was a small figure surrounded by tall sannyasis, the Kumbh Mela pilgrims were able to easily recognize his preeminent position. And they would break through the ranks of devotees and offer dandavats before him. When Prabhupada saw people approaching, he would stop walking and let them touch his feet despite the objections of his disciples. He was already sick, and he had explained in his books that a devotee can become ill if sinful people touch his feet. Still, he did not object. Srila Prabhupada was scheduled to stay at the Mela through January 21st, but his disciples pressed him to go to a place more suitable for his health. Rarely had any of them seen him so sick, and they worried. But my only ambition, said Prabhupada, is that so many people can become enlightened. Word was beginning to circulate that Srila Prabhupada, the guru of the Hare Krishna movement, was staying in a camp on Ganga Dweep, and more people were starting to come to see him. He said that the people coming to Kumbh Mela were expecting all the holy men and spiritual teachers of India to be there. So he felt obliged to stay until the 21st. Rameshwar Swami tried to advise Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada, he said, there is something much more important than your giving darshan to these people, and that is your writing of your books. Only a few thousand people are going to see you here, but if you go on writing, we will distribute your books by the millions. Then millions of people will have your darshan. There is no facility for writing here. The climate is too cold, and your health is weak. Let's go on to Bhubaneswar, where it's warm and they have healthy water. Srila Prabhupada had previously mentioned Bhubaneswar because of the water of Bindu Sarovara, which was supposed to have medicinal properties. And he liked the argument that his writing was more important than his remaining in Allahabad to benefit a few thousand pilgrims. For the devotees on his personal staff, his secretary, servant, and cook, to see Prabhupada going through such austerities while suffering ill health was very painful. Finally, Prabhupada agreed to go. He called in Guru Das and Bhagavat and gave them a final verbal chastising for the mismanaged pandal. Then on the afternoon of the 15th, he prepared to leave. Rameshwar Swami and Guru Das went to the train station to purchase tickets, but they found that no seats were available for weeks. Seeking special consideration, they visited the local railway office, which was a lavishly appointed, remodeled railway car. There they happened to meet their friend from Bombay, Mr. Gupta, and they told him of Prabhupada's illness and of his desire to leave at once for Calcutta. Mr. Gupta phoned Bombay and arranged for a first-class coach to be added to a train coming from Bombay to Allahabad. The devotees profusely thanked Mr. Gupta, who began proposing that Srila Prabhupada travel throughout India in a royal car like the one they were in. The devotees discussed with him about how they might buy or lease such a car, and it seemed an interesting possibility. But the immediate miracle had been arranged, a coach to take Prabhupada out of the crowded throngs of Kumbh Mela to Calcutta. After a difficult ride, inching along through the crowds from the Triveni to the train station, Prabhupada and his party finally arrived at the railway station, where government men helped him and his disciples with their luggage and saw to their comfort. From the devotee's point of view, this was the proper respect for a pure devotee of the Lord, the most important person in the world. Yet such treatment was rare. Srila Prabhupada was pleased, and he asked his secretary to type a letter thanking Mr. Gupta, who was caring for Prabhupada just like a father looking after a son. He invited Mr. Gupta and his family to attend the upcoming Gaur Purnima festival in Mayapur. During the train ride to Calcutta, Srila Prabhupada reiterated his displeasure with the mismanaged ISKCON Pandal at Kumbh Mela. Thousands of guests were coming to the Hare Krishna Pandal without receiving prasadam. Determined that the bad example not be repeated, he dictated a letter to all ISKCON temple presidents. Please accept my blessings. Now you must arrange in each temple there must be sufficient stock of prasadam for distribution. You can keep first-class cooks, 2 or 3, and they should always be engaged. Whenever any guest comes, he must get prasad. This arrangement must be made that the cooks prepare 10, 20 servings at a time of puris and sabji, and then you can add halva and pakoras, and the visitors may be immediately supplied. Whenever a gentleman comes, he must be served. As the 20 servings are being distributed, immediately the cooks prepare another 20 servings and store it. At the end of the day, if no one comes, our own men will take, so there is no loss. You cannot say it is finished. It is not cooked yet. There is no supply for cooking, etc. This must be enforced rigidly. The temple is managed by Srimati Radharani, Lakshmi Ji, so why should there be want? Our philosophy is that if anyone comes, let him take prasadam, chant Hare Krishna, and be happy. Everything is being supplied by Krishna. Krishna is not poor, so why should we deny them? This should be done at any cost. There is no difficulty. It simply requires nice management. At the end of the day, you may sell or give away. If we believe that Krishna is providing for and maintaining everyone, then why should we be misers? This means losing faith in Krishna and thinking that we are the doers and suppliers. We are confident Krishna will supply. Let the whole world come. We can feed them. So please do this nicely. Begin at once. Srila Prabhupada ki. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd Canto, 3rd Chapter, Text 15. The Lord's pastimes out of Vrindavan. Mito yadai sham babita vibado. Mito yadai sham bhavita vibado. Madhva madatam ravilochananam. Madhva madatam ravilochananam. Madhva madatam ravilochananam. Naisham vadopaya yanatonyo. Naisham vadopaya yanatonyo. Mayudhitenardatate swayangva. Mayudhitenardatate swayangsma. Mayudhitenardatate swayangsma. Mito yadai shang bhavata vivado. Madhvad madatam ravilochananam. Naishang vadopaya yanatonyo. Mayudhitentar dadate swayangsma. Please chant.
Mito yadaisham bhavita vivado.
Mito yadaisham bhavata vivado.
Madhvam radadam ravilochananam.
Madhvadatam ravilochananam.
Naisham vadopaya yanatonyo.
Naisham vadopaya yanatonyo.
Mayudyaten tar dhadate swayam sma.
Mito yadaisham bhavita vivado. Madhvam datam ravilochananam. Naisham vadopaya yanatonyo. Mayuditen tar dadate swayam sma. Mito yadaisham bhavata vivado. Madhvam datam ravilochananam. Naisham vadopaya yanatonyo. Mayuditen tar dadate swayam sma. Mito yadaisham bhavata vivado. Madhvam datam ravilochananam. Naisham vadopaya yanatonyo. Mayuditen tar dadate swayam sma. Ladies. Mito yadaisham bhavita vivado. Madhvam datam ravilochananam. Naisham vadopaya yanatonyo. Mayudite antadate sayang sma. Mita one another. Yada when Esham of them Bhavita will take place. Vivada quarrel. Madhuamada intoxication by drinking. Atam ravilochananam of their eyes being copper red. Na, not, Esham, of them. Vadupaya, means of disappearance. Iyan, like this. Atak, besides this. Anyak, alternative. Mai, on my. Udite, disappearance. Antaktadate, will disappear. Swayam, themselves. Sma, certainly. Translation and purport by Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. When they quarrel among themselves, influenced by intoxication, with their eyes red like copper because of drinking, madhu, then only will they disappear. Otherwise, it will not be possible. On my disappearance, this incident will take place. Please repeat. When they quarrel among themselves, influenced by intoxication,
influenced by intoxication,
with their eyes red like copper,
red like
because of drinking madhu. Then only will they disappear. Otherwise it will not be possible. On my disappearance, this incident will take place. Purport. The Lord and his associates appear and disappear by the will of the Lord. They are not subjected to the laws of material nature. No one was able to kill the family of the Lord, nor was there any possibility of their natural death by the laws of nature. The only means, therefore, for their disappearance was to make show of a fight among themselves, as if brawling in intoxication due to drinking. That so-called fighting would also take place by the will of the Lord. Otherwise, there would be no cause for their fighting. Just as Arjuna was made to be illusioned by family affection, and thus the Bhagavad Gita was spoken. So the Yadu dynasty was made to be intoxicated by the will of the Lord and nothing more. The devotees and associates of the Lord are completely surrendered souls. Thus they are transcendental instruments in the hands of the Lord and can be used in any way the Lord desires. The pure devotees also enjoy such pastimes of the Lord because they want to see him happy. Devotees of the Lord never assert independent individuality. On the contrary, they utilize their individuality in pursuit of the desires of the Lord. And this cooperation of the devotees with the Lord makes a perfect scene of the Lord's pastimes. Om Jnana Tamrandasya Garanjana Shalakaya Chaksur Malatamina Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Lankaite Grimsh Shurum Tikranasad Divita. Very interesting purport. Up to this point, this is the Lord's closing pastimes. And in one sense, it's a very piteous sight, this Mosha Leela. We can imagine a battle between superheroes. These are all invincible. And in the material world, they have such mythology. Now mythology comes in the form of movies, popular culture, right? And people watch this with great eagerness. But if they would read Srimad Bhagavatam, they would also get some transcendental appreciation, knowing now then the source of such conceptions. For them it is simply imagination. But the fact is, all their imagination is rooted in this ancient Vedic literature, which has been preserved by the wisdom of the sages and then passed down to us intact. Evam parampara praptim imam rajasyo viduhu. This supreme science was thus understood in a chain of disciplic succession, and the saintly kings understood it in that way. So these saintly kings, they are rajarshis. So they're not bewildered. They don't see this as some mythology, some fairy tale, some story that you tell children to occupy them or to frighten them. So this scene is being set up by the Lord. This is part of his, you could say his, just to give some additional confusion for future generations of skeptics. And if we see how improbable this situation was, but it's very instructive. How the Yadu dynasty, how did this occur? they offended that great sage. What was his name, Maharaj?
Great sage.
The great sage. They put a mace under the tunic
Oh, right.
of
They were sages together.
of Bhimasen.
Yeah, doesn't it?
And they pretended that he was a pregnant lady, and they asked the sage, "You please bless this baby." All right? And so the sage, of course, sages are not easily fooled. So he understood that these drunkard yadus were just having some fun at his expense. So he didn't bless them, he cursed them. He said, "I curse you that this mace will be the instrument of the demise of the Yadu dynasty." So they're all horror-struck, because everyone knows that the curse of a sage, just like the curse of Shringi on Maharaj Parikshit, these curses will come true. And so in great fear, they took that mace and they pulverized it. It was an iron mace. They pulverized it into dust. And what did they do with the dust? They spread it on the seashore, thinking that, okay, now, how can this? But by the transcendental arrangement of Yogamaya, not Mahamaya, this dust turned into, what do you see on the beach when you go there? You see reeds growing. You've seen the sand dunes and you see the reeds. They just grow up. You'll wonder, how can these reeds survive in this situation? Salty sand. So on one picnic one day, long after this incident, they went, and of course, what do Kshatriyas do? All right, they drink. Kshatriyas drink. And what were they drinking? They were drinking madhu. But madhu is not just honey. This madhu is fermented honey. This is the first type of beer. An ancient term for beer is called mead. The mead was cultivated even up until the Christian times in the monasteries, and the monks would drink it. So this madhu, this fermented honey, very intoxicating, and you can see from the description, their eyes became copper red. And their intelligence completely bewildered. These are all brothers and cousin brothers. But some argument came. I forget what was the argument about.
Satyaki and Kritavarma.
Yeah.
They argued over the Battle of Kurukshetra,
But-
which had already been over by a long time.
Long time. But still some argument. Telling war stories. So they all became angry. But they didn't have any weapons. They were on a picnic. So they picked up the reeds that had sprouted from the pulverized dust of the mace that had been cursed, that was destined to become the instrument of their demise. And they began fighting each other with these reeds, which became stronger than iron rods. And with these reeds, they decimated each other, chopped each other to pieces. So just see how when something is destined like this, when it is the will of the Lord, Mare Krishna Rake Ke, Rake Krishna Mare Ke. Krishna wants to kill you, no one can save you. And if Krishna wants to save you, no one can kill you. So it had to be arranged like this because they were superheroes. They could not be. They would not die of old age, and they could not be killed by any ordinary means. It's like Lord Shringadev killed Hiranyakashipu, even though he had been blessed by Lord Brahma with so many exceptions to death. But the one exception he did not expect was the half-man, half-lion incarnation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. You cannot cheat Krishna. So in this way, Krishna's final pastime took place, and then, you see, what happened? This cannot take place in Krishna's presence. So Krishna's disappearance was also specifically arranged. And even that became mythologized in the story of Achilles. Achilles was a superhero. His mother, who was his mother? I think Athena. She dipped him in the nectar of immortality. She held him by his heel when she dipped him in. So his heel was the only vulnerable part of his body. And no one knew of this, but it was found out by some person. And he was killed by being shot by an arrow in the heel, which is how Krishna was also superficially killed. Krishna cannot be killed. But just to fulfill the means of his pastimes, the end of his pastimes. So he left in this way, killed by a hunter who mistook him for a deer. So, Prabhu, you have to shut it off. So yes, once we come to class, all phones have to be shut off. At least for a few minutes, the outside world doesn't exist. And we absorb ourselves in the pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because this will save one from death. Nehabhikramanasasti prativaya navidite swapamapyasya dharmasya chayate mahatobhyat. No loss or diminution, and a little advancement on this path will save one from the greatest fear. And what is that greatest fear? It's the fear of death. The fear of death. All right. We see that even beyond death, people, why do they fear death? Because they don't know what death holds for them. They reject religion because they don't want to accept that there's a hell. They don't mind heaven. But none of them, everybody realizes that they're not going to heaven at a certain point in their lives. By and by, they're not good people. They've done so many things. That's why the Christians have set up this recurring, what do they call it? Prayaschita, where they go and they confess once a week all their sinful activities, and they receive some absolution. The priest says, yes, you chant some prayers and be a good person. But they will not. They will commit again sin because their hearts are not cleansed. Unless the seeds of sin are fried, right? This is a common concept that Srila Prabhupada relates. Because anyone who's a cook, and everyone in India cooks, if you take seeds and you fry them, they cannot fructify. They cannot sprout. You could throw them in the ground, nothing will happen. You can put fertilizer on them. You can water them every day. You can chant mantras. But those fried seeds, they can never sprout. So the seeds of sinful desire that are within the heart can only be fried by the chanting of the holy names. And this alone will stop the sinful reaction of repeated birth and death. But people don't want to accept this simple method. They will make up any excuse not to sacrifice a little of their time, 2 hours a day. If you tell a person, you sit down here for 2 hours a day and you study this stock market and you will be a millionaire in 10 years, I guarantee you that there will be people who will be doing this every single day. And they do it. It's a common thing. Every day people are going to school and sitting in classes for hours and hours. Why? Because there is a promise of material enjoyment when they get their diploma, that they'll make thousands or millions of dollars. And they subject themselves to so much nonsense. The slaughterhouse education is just so much nonsense. You simply become an indentured servant to some company. People are all about, oh, we don't want to become slaves. But yet they voluntarily become subservient for 20, 30 years of their lives to some company, just to make a few pennies, to get a house, to keep a wife. This is an inferior status of life. Without self-realization, one cannot expect to be happy in this life or the next. Without self-realization, regardless of one's material accomplishments, he will never be satisfied. Prabhupada made it very clear here that the devotees and associates of the Lord are completely surrendered souls. Thus, they are transcendental instruments in the hands of the Lord and can be used in any way the Lord desires. And there's that verse. Nimitta matram bhava savyasachin. Nimitta matram. I used to have to stand up in class because I worked so hard like Bhakti Dylan. We were always embarrassed because we worked so hard when Prabhupada was coming, practically all night. I remember we stayed up all night putting the finishing touches on this Vyasa-san because Prabhupada was scheduled to arrive the next day. And we were still finishing it when Prabhupada walked in the door. And then Prabhupada would give morning and evening lectures. So it was even harder to stay awake, depending on it. So I would always stand off to the side where I thought Srila Prabhupada would not see me. But Prabhupada sees everything. This is the point. We think that the spiritual master does not see, that his vision is only where his eyes are, but no. Spiritual master sees Trikalagya. He sees everything, past, present, and future. Yet somehow or other, we think that we can fool the spiritual master. So that he will not see me, he will not chastise me. Actually, when you talk to these devotees from the Lilamrita, Guru Das and Bhagavat Maharaj at that time, Guru Das was sannyasi and Bhagavat Maharaj was not sannyasi at the time. They will comment how they realized that Srila Prabhupada's chastising them was great mercy. It's not that by some design they committed these mistakes. No, they were sincerely trying. But they were inexperienced. And therefore mistakes were made. And Prabhupada chastised them just to instruct them. Because mistakes obviously should not be made twice. This is the whole point, that you learn from your mistakes. Everyone will make mistakes. If you're not making mistakes, then you're not trying hard. It is just a fact. But you have to learn from those mistakes. So in this pastime here, ultimately the instruction for us is that the Supreme Lord must be considered from the standpoint of his inconceivable pastimes. These are not ordinary. The materialists will single these out to try to make Krishna into some mundane personality. One has to be very careful when encountering these types of persons. They will say in the Mahabharata, it says like this. In the Mahabharata, there are so many things. Why do they not describe how in 18 days, there were 64 Akshahinis of armies destroyed on the battlefield? This is an inconceivable number, 64 Akshahinis. This represents 640 million people, not 64 million, 640 million. Yeah? Or the bed of arrows that supported grandfather Bhishma Deva, or Arjuna's arrow that penetrated the earth and brought forth the Ganges, or so many other superhuman things. They'll say it's all mythology, of course. That's their excuse. And none of this is meant to be real. It's all exaggerated just to impose some status. They say that is why they create giants in literature like the Bible, David and Goliath. Goliath is supposed to be a giant from a race of giants. But why would it be included in the Bible like that? But actually, it's a fact that there were a race of giants. They were not a race. They were ordinary individuals, but they were from the previous yuga. The previous yuga, all the living entities were of larger stature, like Arjuna and Krishna. The Mahabharata described that Krishna was 18 feet tall. That was his size, but that was not. There were many like him, like grandfather Bhishma. Arjuna was much smaller, actually, according to them. I'm not sure exactly why. But Krishna was 18, according to 18 feet tall. It is said that when Alexander the Great entered certain areas, they were concerned about meeting the armies or the inhabitants because all the buildings they saw were of larger than proportionate stature. As if they were built by a race of giants. So this gave them some pause to think. But they were just observing ruins from a previous age, when the people were bigger. So they had no reason to fear at that point, but still they were concerned. So all these things give some evidence about the nature of the previous yugas, what was there. And so this is nothing. I mean, when you can throw a nuclear weapon with a mantra, killing each other with reeds that were grown from the dust particles of a cursed iron mace, is not very wonderful. Quite a common thing. All these subtle sciences, which we call magic now, were in full force. And the fact that we have such understanding or some vestigial remnants of this understanding is an indication of their previous existence. We just don't have much information. If you told someone 100 years ago that you would be carrying a supercomputer in your pocket, they would think that that's mythology. How is it possible? They would think like that. But it is nothing. We can see it's just technology. And so exactly like this is just technology, the subtle technology of mantra, sound vibration, was completely prevalent in previous yugas. And they could do anything with it. Anything. They had spaceships. Not only that, they had cloaking devices. We see them in the movies. They could become visible at will. Yogis could transport themselves from one location to another simply by touching water. They could disassemble themselves molecularly and then reappear in any other place of flowing water. Water connects everything on the earth. They just had to think of it. Instant transportation, right? They didn't have to have some elaborate transporter. All by mantra. So what is the great deal about any of this when we're reading these super excellent, superhuman pastimes? What it means to us is that everything else in the Bhagavatam is completely true. As like Prabhupada says, if you are cooking, you test one kernel of rice from the center, you can understand that the whole pot is cooked. So in this way, we can understand that the truth, especially Prabhupada said, first and second cantos of Srimad Bhagavatam, if these are read and understood, one has already, to that extent, understood what is the science of self-realization. Of course, he will read more and he will understand more and he will be able to act more. This is the real test, not just theoretical, but practical application. This is the Jnanam Vijnanam Sahitam Brahma Karma Swabhavajam. Jnanam Vijnanam. That the Brahman is not just knowledgeable, he's wise due to practical application. That's wisdom. Practical application of knowledge means wisdom, realized knowledge. So this is the key. So one may know theoretically, I am not this body. But how does one act on that platform? What does that mean? I'm not this body. Do I ignore it? Yes, in some cases. Like these sadhus at the Kumbh Mela, with the matted locks. They only take bath once a year at Kumbh Mela. So that they don't wear anything. Some of them only wear the wind. Digvijay. They don't wear anything. Just the wind. That's their garments. And obviously, if you're wearing the wind, it means you're not wearing anything. But sometimes when they're in public, they wear kopin. This brahmachari cloth, kopina, like the Goswamis of Vrindavan. What we call Brahmin underwear, kopin. So you can apply like that. You can ignore all external material traditions and act on that platform of being aloof. But unless one is also serving the Supreme Lord in some capacity, then it is all show. It has no meaning. He has to be acting on behalf of the Supreme Lord. Nimitta matram bhava savyasachin. Has to be an instrument. Cannot just be another. Now there are so many naked people running around. There's no benefit to them or to anyone else. They're crazy people for the most part. The men thinking they're women, women thinking they're men, or thinking something else like that. It's all crazy, illusory, double illusory. First you think you're the body, then you don't know which body you are. It's double illusion. So self-realization is meant to eliminate all misunderstanding of material consciousness and come to that ultimate, I am a servant of Krishna. That is it. Das das gopi bhartu padakamalaya das das anudas. And we pray every morning to Srimati Tulsi Devi, please make me a servant. We're not asking her for some special arrangement for nice prasadam, a nice room, hot water. No, we don't. Devotees don't care about these things. We simply want to become a servant, whatever the circumstances may be. This is not the greatest material austerity, living in the ashram. Sometimes it may seem that way. But there are much greater austerities. Materialists are struggling so hard in so many places, in so many ways, but they're not getting anything. It's all for nothing. There is no transcendental benefit. They will work hard their whole lives and then they will die in distress, in loneliness, with debilitating disease, with diminished capacity of the mind. This is what is awaiting a person. But you see, the devotees, they die mostly in full consciousness, leaving on their own volition, sometimes at the time of their choosing, on an auspicious time, because they're not fearful. Nehabhikramanasasti, they have no fear. They know that this body is finished. I beg to take birth again wherever the spiritual master wants me to. It is up to him. I'm simply his servant. If he wants me to take birth again and again, so be it. The devotee has no desire for liberation. He doesn't care. We just pray, let me be a servant. To be a servant of Radha Govinda doesn't necessarily mean in the eternal pastimes in Goloka Vrindavan. Because we see so many servants have come to the material world. So you have to be careful what you wish for. Don't alter these prayers just to suit some false conception that I don't want to come back again. Yeah, that's okay. But if you come back in the service of the Supreme Lord, what could be more glorious? You see all these servants who came along with the Supreme Lord. These are all his eternal associates. And they came back. So are we greater than them? Is there anything redeeming about us? Who are we? Are we something special? No. So there were innumerable associates of the Lord that came. And who can imagine the transcendental emotions that could be exchanged face to face with the Supreme Lord? And in the end, of course, they're not their bodies. They slaughtered each other. And what did they do? They immediately, in their original spiritual bodies, it's an instantaneous transformation. There's no delay. No. They are simultaneously existing here and there. It's not something to bother your mind about that, oh, this is such a terrible thing. No. Immediately, this body, this material body, their transcendental existence is already there. They were just using these bodies like vessels and discarded like you discard an empty pop bottle. It's finished. Who can imagine this, how the Lord enjoys with his eternal associates? And it's not up to us to try to imagine. But we have, by the grace of the great sages, we can read some of these interactions. Like we were reading about the Lord in that pastime with Satyabhama and the Parijata tree. Who can imagine this? How fortunate these Satyabhama, all these other 16,000 queens that were imprisoned by Narakasura. Who could imagine their situation, that each one personally had Krishna. Personally. What pious activities that this living entity had to perform in order to get that position. It's inconceivable. You know, and the materialists are thinking that if I, martyr myself, I'll get X number of virgins. You know, this is laughable, actually. You know, when one thinks of it. It is such an inferior concept. You know, and it does not reflect a very thoughtful philosophy. You know, so, but yet, somehow or other, it exists. And if one reads the Bhagavatam, there is so much more that we have to give, where people can see things that they could never imagine by reading the Bhagavatam. The most wonderful, because Krishna is, of course, he's the most wonderful. He's everything. And his pastimes also must be wonderful. And when we're distributing these books, we're giving people the opportunity, like Srila Prabhupada. The only thing that made him happy at the Kumbh Mela, which otherwise he considered to be a failure, was this distribution of his books. Thousands and thousands every day. They're small books, but it doesn't matter. These books are like Brahmastra weapons. Anyone who opens that book, it's able to destroy his material life. The most powerful weapon. So there's nothing more powerful than transcendental knowledge. And to give it is the most beneficial action that we can do individually and collectively as a society. Make no mistake that this, whatever little austerity we may be experiencing, the benefits, now, what should we say? What can be said of the devotees who are distributing books or preaching the glories of the Lord? What will be their reward? What will be their reward? Who can see? We can, from the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya, we see how elevated these souls. You know, there's even Junior Haridas. You know, he came back to the Supreme Lord, and he could have his constant association, even though he wasn't in his physical body anymore. Now he was in the body of a Gandharva, but he was still an associate of the Lord. So we're not trying to exaggerate that if someone takes seriously to devotional service, that he will ever be at a loss for anything. The greatest reward, janma karma chame divyam evam yoveti tatpataha. Tyaktva deyam punar janma nayate mameti sojana. So this is so important that one understands the transcendental nature of Krishna's appearance and disappearance. So here we are, the disappearance. He will never take birth again in the material world. Never take birth again. And he will come back to me, Krishna. He will come back to Krishna. So we have already entered into Krishna's pastimes by being part of this Lord Chaitanya's mission. We can either know it and act in that respect, knowing full well that I don't have to, speculate about the situation. Just be satisfied. Just be satisfied. There's that other verse, Tatenu kampam susamikshamano. I forget the whole verse. But then Seva Dayabak. It means that the example is that a son is the rightful inheritor of the father's estate. The rightful inheritor. So it means that if the father has millions of dollars when he dies, that all goes to the son. Or the son and his siblings, or the wife and the son and the siblings. So in the same way, the devotee automatically, Krishna has his reward. It is just waiting for him. He doesn't have to do anything. Just has to remain a faithful son and a faithful servant. And he will receive his portion of the kingdom of God, as the materialists say. But that doesn't mean that you get some piece of paper or you get some, no. You get the eternal benefit of Krishna's association. This is eternal. So eva dayabhak. Without fail. It must happen. So are there any questions or comments? We are a little late on time. Forgot to look at the clock. Maharaj, any corrections?
No.
Maharaj is a great sage. We have to. Any other concerns? Kishan, no? Must not have been a good class. Kishan doesn't have any questions. I didn't provoke any intriguing thoughts. Who can imagine this scene? Can you imagine this scene? The Yadus drunk, picking up reeds and slicing each other to pieces with these reeds. Right? Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, the Lord's pastimes out of Vrindavan ki.